I promise this presentation is not going to be tons and tons of text to read. It's going to be more of a pretty pictures presentation. So I'm going to start out with just this first kind of list of a lot of the different forays that NAMA has done for the last dozen or so years. I'm going to start by saying that whenever we're talking about NAMA, it's the North American Mycological Association, and I would encourage you to check out their website as well. There's 90 some affiliate clubs all over the country. There's just, it's such a deep website. There's really lots of info. You could learn a lot just by looking at where the other clubs are and looking at their websites. We incorrectly sometimes say we're going to the national foray, but really it's international because we're the North American club, and it encompasses Canada and Mexico as well. So it's definitely kind of the annual big foray. There are also a number of regional forays that are hosted, and what they do is have different clubs. One of these affiliate clubs each year say, I have a great location. I think people would love coming here and learning about mushrooms in X part of the country. They try to spread it out so that you're not always sort of in the East or in the West, so that everybody sort of has a chance to join without traveling too far. So I was looking at the website myself today, and the first foray was actually in 1961. So that was 45 years ago. Beginning in 1997, they started vouchering the things that we found. So that means that they're saving them for science. Lots of DNA testing is being done now. So it's sort of this citizen science snapshot of what's found in an area. And of course, like we all learned this summer, we're at the mercy of the weather. So lots of people talk about the NAMA curse, that as soon as they plan something, that area gets no rain, and you're inviting, you know, anywhere from 150 to 350 people to come and forage. But that definitely was not the case this year. So we're going to have some fun pictures to show. I was just going to point out the very first foray that I was kind of invited to. I remember hearing everyone at the MMS meetings talking NAMA this, NAMA that, are you going to go? And Ron, I think you said, you should go. And it was the 2009 Lafayette, Louisiana foray, which is at the bottom of the list there. And I remember it was over Thanksgiving. Again, because it's in a different part of the country every year, the timing's different. And it's really based on where the mushroom or when the mushroom hunting is good in that area. So I think I remember the Lafayette one was right around Thanksgiving. Then I missed the next two, 2010 and 2011. Sometimes they sell out, and if you don't decide quick enough, you don't get to go. So the next one I went to was that Scotts Valley, California one, which is actually in Santa Cruz. And I remember it so distinctly because it was in January. And I thought, man, I get to look for mushrooms in January. Like, sign me up, right? So it's kind of become my husband and I's annual, like, this will be, actually, I like to call this presentation kind of like what I did on my summer vacation, but sometimes it's winter and sometimes it's fall, but it's just sort of that one trip that we do every year and try to explore what else is around the area that we're going to hunt mushrooms. And again, you get to learn from the locals, like what's in their area that's different than in our area. Lots of times you start by learning the geography and the geology of the area. You might get a tree identification lecture, and it can be, you can go to some super technical lectures, or you can do the artsy stuff or the food stuff, or you can just go on forays. And I think in these next couple presentations, you might see some overlap. What I thought would be fun about this presentation is kind of 4 different views or 5 different views of the same event and how different people sort of experienced it differently. So this was the location. It was right near Winter Park, Colorado. It was in Granby, and it happened to be at a YMCA camp. So a lot of times, just to keep things very affordable, it'll be at a church camp or a YMCA camp. There's, sometimes there's varied accommodations. There might be some rooms that are more like a hotel room and other rooms that are more like a dorm room. And you might be sharing a room with, 3 or 4 other people. And lots of times they try to have different ways of signing up to kind of accommodate different styles of lodging. It's cafeteria food, but really you're so busy out hunting for mushrooms and learning that, gosh, I've just never minded if I'm in a bunk bed with a little thin mattress. Okay, I mind a little, but now that I'm getting older. My first experience at the Colorado Foray was signing up to go on a foray at Winter Park, where you take the gondola up to the top of the ski hill. So it was 10,000 feet. I'm not a huge fan of heights. So for me, even the gondola ride was a little bit of a new experience. I'm sitting on the gondola with someone who was from Colorado, who's just peeled out the window, and she's like, I can see Bolitz from here. So it was definitely exciting to be somewhere after such a dry summer here, where there was an unusual amount of mushrooms, which isn't usual for there. So here's us getting on the gondola and riding up to altitude with Ron. Our friends Trent and Kristen, who I think have presented to our club before, they are Colorado natives, now relocated to Wisconsin. But you can see definitely a different kind of hunting than we're used to, like, rocky, kind of dry. And you almost needed a lecture on how to see the mushrooms, because it wasn't as lush and grassy as we're used to. It was much more rocky. This is my husband, Fred, kind of just taking a moment, enjoying the lookout. And then finding a humongous bolete. It's not the prettiest one, but just, for us, again, coming from the Midwest, where we have a pretty quick season, and this year happened to be dry. We don't really get the opportunity to find boletes here as much as we get to find other mushrooms. I know folks from the West Coast are always jealous that we find hen of the woods, and of course they find humongous chanterelles, but then they always talk about how ours are so delicious. So every space has its own delicacies. I'm laughing a little bit looking at this, because when I was putting the PowerPoint slide together, when you drag a photo in, PowerPoint tries to say, here's some text you might want. It's trying to outsmart you. And it says this is a picture of, and this one said, a picture of a man holding a loaf of bread. I was like, well, I guess it kind of looks like that. So I think lots of times people call porcinis penny buns. And I think that the West Coast ones would be called a loaf of bread. But here's another one. I love taking pictures of people taking pictures, because sometimes when we're looking at this beautiful mushroom picture, you don't really get a sense for what it was like when you came upon it in the woods, right? And on this one, can you guys see my mouse or not really?
Yep.
Yeah. It's just, there's all of this debris. Again, we're used to hunting in a lot more green and lush areas. But lots of these were really hiding under the debris. And a typical, here's one of my photos. This is that exact same mushroom, kind of touched up. You might end up seeing it in the photo contest, as I was thinking about as I was putting it in here. But anyway, to me, this is such a styled photo where stuff has been cleaned away and you've focused in on it. And if I go back a little, it's very different in the scene of kind of how you really have to look for it. This is Boletus rubriceps, which is one of the edulous species, if you're calling, edulous a group. But all of the people we were with call them rubies. They're like, we're looking for rubies. So I call this sort of the ruby in the rough. And these are them cleaned up. I think we've talked before about how, when we're cutting things for scientific purposes, we would not cut off the bottoms. We would make sure we got every piece of these for scientific identification, but we were clearly collecting these to eat. So, so cut off the edges of them. This is one of those, you just can't not take a million pictures of it. When you see the Amanita muscaria on the West Coast, they look like they're fake. My husband was laughing. He's like, how many pictures have you taken of these? I'm like, every few steps when I would see them, I'm like, I just can't stop. They're just so striking, and they just look like a picture book. So I may have taken a few too many of these very kind of common and popular mushrooms. These were just a nice batch of Tricholoma zelleri, which I don't know a ton about. I know the tricholomas, there's matsutake out there, and these are not the white matsutake. And I don't think they're the ones that we have, but it was just such a nice grouping that originally I took it, mostly I took it to learn more about it, right? So it's like you can kind of take a picture of a good grouping, and maybe you don't even know what the species is when you take the photo. And then you get to learn more from it by going home or showing other people like Ron or, you know, looking it up online, looking it up in books. So this was a really popular event at NAMA. There's, this is Alyssa Allen, and she's really into mushroom dyes. This is a piece of hers. Every fiber in this is probably all wool was dyed with mushrooms. So if you haven't been introduced to mushroom dyes before, again, I think it was my Santa Cruz Foray where I signed up for an all-day workshop with Alyssa. And I was completely blown away. I had no idea. Originally, I thought, well, I'm sure mushrooms make brown dyes, and why would you dye wool brown when you can get brown wool from sheep? And again, completely blown away. She did some wool things, and then this is a little silk scarf where she was doing, oh my goodness, I'm gonna forget the name of it. Jennifer, do you remember what it's called? Where you sew in the, it's not, is it shibori? Shibori dyeing, where you stitch through the fabric to kind of make like a tie-dye. So she would stitch a mushroom shape, and so then the white, where you pulled the thread tight, didn't get the dye. And then this brown dye was this Pisolithus mushroom, which I've seen a couple times, but had just never been interested in it because I think one of the common names of that mushroom is like the dog poop mushroom or something, but it truly looks like a pile of poo on the ground. But it made this beautiful, rich brown dye that was pretty fun to see. Another one of the lectures was dehydrated foods, and kind of using these would be the white matsutake, and kind of putting one of those in a jar with a little bit of seasoning, maybe some green onions, which are also dried, pour some hot water of them, and have this sort of instant, like a hot pot soup. So it's fun to see what other people do with their mushrooms. And, you know, these are, I think, were cherry tomatoes and maybe some mangoes or pineapples. But yeah, just to kind of learn things from other folks and kind of see what they're into. We met these folks at NAMA who were local and just visiting, and they happened to have started this Mystic Mountain Mushrooms cultivation, and we got to take a little side field trip after NAMA. They were growing a lot of oysters, and they sort of self-select for the bluest oysters they can find. So when they have something that grows extra blue, they try to save those spores and grow again. So they are kind of known for very blue oysters. It was really fun to just see what folks are doing. Before we left, we were digging through their pile of discards, which was fruiting all sorts of stuff. So maybe kind of an embarrassing photo to share, but we did a little dumpster diving on the way back to our car and found some dinner for that night. This is my friend Alan, actually, and I met him at the Santa Cruz Foray as well. He lives in San Francisco, and since 2012, we have made a point every year to meet at NAMA. So I really just want to share that for me, NAMA has been about, or the NAMA annual Foray has been about seeing other places and learning about mushrooms, but really, really meeting people. Some of the people I've met at the different forays, I would consider my best friends. This was our group from this year, kind of having a nice dinner together at the end of the foray. They also believe differently than I do. I always think we had found a bunch of boletes and I was going to preserve the most beautiful ones and eat the ugly ones. And they're like, no, you eat the pretty ones, just enjoy them. So we made a really nice dinner with these beautiful boletes on top of it. And while I'm talking about community, I wanted to talk a little bit about Instagram. That NAMA started an Instagram site, and we've had different, I'd say, influencers or people do takeovers. So our group did a takeover during the foray to kind of show some of the highlights of the foray. I think even after the foray, Tim, our president, did a takeover and showed local stuff. But just like I would encourage visiting the NAMA website, I would encourage visiting the Instagram page. It's just really a source of a lot of info, and it's a source of a lot of different people. It's not really focused on just one thing. Some of it's very, very scientific. Some of it's artsy. Some of it's culinary. But it's really just this beautiful sampling of people across the country and world who are interested in mushrooms. So that was my experience of the Colorado Foray. Does anyone have any questions specifically for me before I turn it over to Howard, who will share a bit about his experience? What's the green mushroom at the bottom left?
Huge that is.
Yeah, so that looks like it's a stinkhorn egg to me. And that is not my photo. I just did a screen grab from the NAMA Instagram page, which if people haven't ever logged on to Instagram, is very photo based versus, how Facebook, a lot of them are little stories. Instagram is really more about kind of like a photo with caption. So, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, you got to start out a trip to NAMA with a good laugh. This is my sixth, the Colorado Foray was my sixth NAMA National Foray, International Foray. And I think this year we had, at last count, at least 25 people from Minnesota attending out of the 220 or so that were attending NAMA. And I think everybody goes there for their own reasons. Probably 25 people from Minnesota had 25 reasons for going. My wife and I attend and look at it as kind of a mini vacation and an adventure, and we like to do things and extend the 3-day foray to be a vacation. So you are going to see a vacation show here. This is leaving the airport on the way to Denver. Stopped at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal to see the buffalo herd, but we came upon a few mule deer on the way. So other sights is what we'll be seeing here, as well as some mushrooms. Go ahead. Can't go to Denver without enjoying the local spirits. In this case, they were very hot spirits, phenomenal Southwestern cuisine. Go ahead. And we happened to stay at the Art Hotel. That's my wife, Janet, which is directly connected to the Denver Museum of Contemporary Art. And we're both art lovers, so we spent a full day at the art museum. Go ahead. This is the hotel. That's the museum right across the plaza from our hotel. And go ahead. The other thing we did was spend a full day at the Denver Botanical Gardens, which are phenomenal. I think every one of the forays, the national forays, have things like this that are close to the foray. So if you have the chance and can take that 3-day foray, turn it into a 7-day or a 10-day mini vacation, go for it. It's a great reason to go to places you might not go otherwise. Go. Another scene from the botanical garden. This was must have been a 100-degree day when we were there, but it was still absolutely cool and wonderful walking around this in the shade. Thanks. Go. Driving around the area once we left Denver. Actually, this is the way from the foray going up north. You see all sorts of things you don't see in Minnesota, obviously. A herd of antelope right in the suburbs. Go. And north of the Colorado foray is the Grand Teton National Park. And I just wanted you to note that I've seen this on perfectly clear days. When we were in Colorado this time, there were the huge fires in the western states, and this was coming across the mountains from California. But we were able to see the Tetons, but the fires were ferocious, and luckily where we were in the Colorado foray, there seemed to be no smoke, which was great. So it was localized. Move ahead. This is a reservoir at the Grand Tetons. It's the big lake, Jackson Lake Reservoir. And one of the NAMA presentations was our chief mycologist was a professor from University of Colorado, south of where the foray was, talked about climate change and its impact on mushrooms. That was her expertise. I put this photo in for a purpose. The last 5 years in this area has been the lowest rainfall on record, 5 continuous years with 5 years of the highest heat. It is changing the mycology of the entire region and the mountains especially. Go ahead. So YMCA Camp of the Rockies, which Kathy talked about, was actually quite green and lush. Not as rocky as I thought it would be, but there were rocks. The area we were in must have had just the right amount of rainfall. While the mushroom species tend to be migrating vertically up the mountain slopes every year, the species found at 6,000 are now at 8,000. The 8,000 are at 10,000. And it has to do with climate change. So you tell me where that's going to stop. We did about an 80-mile drive along the edge of the mountains and into the mountains, and 90% of the hillsides where we were brown, not as green as this. They were brown or black. The heat and drought, coupled with insects, have killed hundreds of thousands of acres of trees. Go ahead. Kathy talked a little bit about the vouchering program. This is the typical scene you would see at the NAMA forays, the national forays, where Adele Meda from Minnesota is the recorder of the specimens that come through, supporting a team of, I don't know, a dozen, 15 students and mycologists that are identifying and recording the species that are brought in. This year, I believe it was reported 168 specimens were vouchered and preserved, in this case being sent to the Denver Botanical Museum for the foreseeable future. I don't know if Adele, if you have anything to say about that, but it was an interesting room to be in because it certainly smelled of mushrooms.
And not as bad as some places where we get more amanitas.
Right.
Howard.
Well,
Just a comment, because of the dry conditions, 168 is a really low number for Nama Forays. Usually 250 would be, okay. And some forays have seen over 400 plus species identified and vouchered. So you get some idea of how dry it was, but people were diligent as they always are, and they scour and the areas that they go to. And I think probably everything that was to be found was found.
that could well be. Move on to the next slide. I want to keep going here so we get time for everybody else. There were amanitas brought in, and as Kathy showed, the fly agaric was, when it was found, it was profuse and gorgeous. So here's some more pictures of that. The vouchering group probably kept a few of these, but most of them ended up being tossed ultimately. Go ahead. I thought one of the more interesting mushrooms that we found was the hawkswing mushroom, which reminds me texturally of the Minnesota pheasantback mushroom. Totally different species, but Sarcodon imbricatus, how do you say it? Yeah. Was an interesting find, and there were quite a few of these brought in, but it was a beautiful mushroom. Move ahead. More vouchering. This was a table that had the Rocky Mountain Reds, the Colorado Reds, and my wife and I were lucky enough to find a few of those. If you'd go ahead. Here's a few in their habitat. And I should say that while Janet goes on these forays with me, she accompanies. She's not a particular mushroom person, but she does like to go find mushrooms. She does not eat mushrooms. She paints them. So go ahead. She happened to go and find probably the biggest Colorado Red of the foray. The one that she's holding is weighed in at slightly over 4 pounds on the kitchen scale at the YMCA camp. The day before, I found what I thought was a big one. It was puny in comparison. She always has to outdo me. But she had a wonderful time in the woods spotting these things, and it was just a great experience. Move ahead. One of the things that she did was attend the dyeing workshop that Alyssa Allen put on, Kathy referred to. And here's a picture of some of the setup that they had. Alyssa brought in dried mushrooms. They stewed them in vats and made little pots of dye that they soaked wool yarn in. And that is the sampling of yarns that were produced. Each of the participants in that workshop, and it was a full day workshop, had a card of the mushrooms that they dyed on the bottom right there with the genus and species of each of the mushrooms that produced that color, and in concert with different chemicals that were added to the dyeing liquids. So she had a day of actually in the woods with me foraying, and a day doing the workshop on dyeing. So it's just it's an invitation to all of you who have partners that might not be so into mushrooms. There's something to do for lots of diverse interests when you're at these forays. Go ahead, please. These are some of the things that were actually that Alyssa brought, but each of the participants got to do a tie-dyed silk scarf out of the dyes that they produced that day. Go ahead. Oh, and you might recognize this guy by his pants and hat. John Lamprecht is the current person in charge of NAMA's National Awards Program, and he did several presentations on the last evening while we were there. But I think he got the award for the best trousers. Those are mushrooms, which you might be able to make out. Go ahead. And after the foray, the things that were not vouchered, or maybe some that were, got tossed. So very ecologically sound, I guess. The mushrooms were returned to the wild, the ones that weren't used or saved for eating. Actually, if you were, I forgot to mention, those mushrooms that Janet and I were holding, come February 5th, the Minnesota annual banquet is going to be able to sample those. Those mushrooms were given to John Lamprecht and Claudette, who had a dryer along at the Foray. They sliced them up and dried them, and they'll be turned over to our chef at the Minnesota Valley Country Club for part of the meal, yet to be determined. We haven't set the menu quite yet. We're still gathering or soliciting mushrooms from our members for that banquet. But you'll have some Colorado mushrooms, actually from several people that have been promised to be donated. Go ahead. We're almost done with our little trip here.
Wanted to clarify that it's the big ones you were holding that we're going to eat, not this pile of discard.
Right. Oh, yeah, please. This would, what do you call it? Mulligan stew.
There you go.
Anyhow, we extended our trip, drove up to Yellowstone, spent a couple days up there, stayed at the inn right at Old Faithful. Go ahead. Saw the buffalo, mandatory. Go ahead. And of course, we got to see Old Faithful. So that was our trip, a pre-trip, a post-trip, and a foray stuck in the middle. And that's how we did it. Next, just one more plug. Missouri NAMA 2022. Put on your calendar if you want to experience something like like what you've just seen and are about to see, September 29th through October 2nd, 2022. You have to be a NAMA member to attend. This is going to be down in the Ozarks. It's a 620-mile drive. You don't necessarily have to fly to this one. It's a long day's drive, but doable, or extend it, make a vacation out of it. Thanks all. That's all I've got to say. Next.
Awesome. Thanks, Howard. Awesome. Yeah, when we were kind of looking at the different places that have hosted NAMA, kind of the closest it's been here for a little while was the 2017 Foray in Cable, Wisconsin. And the Minnesota Club spent a number of years sort of helping train Foray leaders, kind of scouting out the location to kind of help out with that NAMA. And one of our sort of favorite, loving, dedicated people, Marek was one of our crew who trained to help out at that Foray, but unfortunately lost his battle with cancer the year before that Foray. So now every year we send a person in his honor to experience the Foray. And we have two of the winners here tonight to tell us about their experience. So I'm going to stop my share here and introduce Viktor Boris, who traveled to Colorado this year and is going to share his experience.
Yeah, thank you. Let me get my screen up. Everybody see and hear okay? Good to go. All right, great. Thank
That's
you.
good.
I am excited to talk about my experience at NAMA. It was life-changing, I would say. I'm very new to my journey in mycology and mushrooms. I joined the club in January of last year, January or February. And so my entire experience of mycology has just been basically a drought in Minnesota, which didn't yield very many mushrooms. And then this foray, which makes it this trip the vast majority of my experience. So it was great. I'm an avid hiker and camper, so the best part of the trip for me was just being outside in the Rockies. It's the first trip I've taken since the pandemic started, and so the hiking was phenomenal. I spent 2 half days foraging, looking for mushrooms, and also got away from the group a little bit and did a solo hike in Colorado. So summited a little peak and had a lot of fun with my hiking. And as I mentioned, the mushrooms abounded. I am not much of a taxonomist and don't know my mushroom types, but I had a lot of fun finding them. My favorite was the top left corner because I found it associated with the decaying wood and I could see the mycelium with it, which I thought was a pretty cool mushroom to find. And when I wasn't out looking for mushrooms, I spent time in some of the presentations. So I just wanted to highlight two of my favorite presentations. This one is from Dr. Sarah Bronco, who is from the University of Colorado, Denver. I think I'm remembering right. And she was talking about heavy metal tolerance in Swillus luteus. And so here they're using heavy metal in kind of a loose way, but basically what she's saying is in areas that are contaminated, both naturally contaminated with high levels of metals and areas that are artificially contaminated from human activities, you're able to observe different kinds of species adapting. A famous example is at the turn of the Industrial Revolution. People in biology will talk about moths changing color with ash covering trees versus normal tree color. And so basically what they're observing is the first instance of divergence in mushrooms due to human industrial activity. And so all of their analysis and observation of that divergence is genetic. And so you take samples from an uncontaminated area and a contaminated area, and then you can look at gene level expressions or what kinds of cell machinery are being upregulated and produced in excess to help something survive. And then you can also look for point mutations in those genes, or how are certain machinery in a cell changing. And that's kind of the start of a speciation event. So it's very interesting to be observing that in real time. And the diagram here was cool for me because it was simultaneously a crash course in fungal biology, fungal cell biology, and metal tolerance. And so what it's showing is that fungi have multiple ways that they can elude the effects of toxic amounts of metals. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but black diamonds show heavy metals. And those heavy metals can be associated with chelating agents, which are the blue Pac-Man pieces that are grabbing onto the heavy metal. And those just immobilize the metals in the cytosol of the cell, which is like the fluid that's not really important to the function of the cell. And it also shows that you have transmembrane transporters. And so you can upregulate and downregulate transporters at the cell wall and the membrane to limit the amount of metal coming into the cell or speed up the amount of metal that exits the cell. And you can also compartmentalize. So you could take, you could take stuff that's chelated from chelating agents, or take stuff that's coming in and out through those transporters, and you can basically envelop them in a membrane and a vacuole, and then expel them from the cell to the cell surface. And they also show upregulation of antioxidants. So when you're under any kind of stressful environment, any organism, and especially fungi, would be prone to oxidative stress. And so the upregulation of antioxidants forms of protection. And this was really interesting to me because one of the areas of my work in chemical engineering is iron air batteries and a little bit of lithium ion batteries. And so the Bronco group is interested in using these associations or these tendencies in Swillis to reforest areas that are contaminated with heavy metals. And so Swillis is an ectomycorrhizal fungi. It has associations with pine trees mostly. And they have a little bit of preliminary data that she showed that it seems that they might be able to protect the trees from heavy metal contamination. And so if you have Swillis that's adapted to those conditions, you might have a way to reforest areas that have been damaged by that kind of activity. And then the lighter presentation that I really enjoyed was the same dyeing presentation from Alyssa Allen that other people have talked about. And in particular, I liked the top left picture. She showed it in real life. She's dyeing with lichen here, and she gets blue and pink colors. And she gets them both from the lichen using different kinds of pretreatment. And so she had a couple different ways that she treated her fibers before introducing the dye from the fungi. And they produce wildly different colors. And so I thought it was amazing the depth of color that she could get on her fibers with that. And that's all I got. So I'll take any questions that people have in the chat. Can't see it. No questions, but happy to take any if anyone has any.
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry, I'll turn my video on. So are other, I was interested to hear that the mushrooms are vulnerable to oxidative stress. And is that also true of plants?
So mushrooms are not, when you say it, so basically if you put anything under an environmental stress, so like introducing large amounts of a metal or drought conditions or heat shock, those kinds of things make any kind of living organism prone to oxidative stress. Oh. And so when you talk about metabolism in the large sense, you're forming reactive oxygen intermediates, and then you can also neutralize them. So free radical scavengers are like the common mechanism that you do that. And any kind of environmental stress will tend to push an organism outside of a metabolic homeostasis. And so when you're pushed outside of that, you will start to feel the detrimental effects.
Thanks.
I'm also not a biologist. I've just taken a couple classes. So if somebody hears something wrong, feel free to jump in.
I have one question. Just had you heard of this study before you were at NAMA, or did it just kind of pop out to you and it was sort of like a perfect synergy of your interests and you just kind of happened upon her studies?
It was brand new. And actually the research is brand new. So the publication that I pulled that diagram from is in preprint, and she only has one other article published. So it's a very new body of research, it seems.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you guys. Thank you for the opportunity too. I loved going. It was amazing.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, I love that there's certain things that different people kind of really key in on. And I also think it's funny that we all mentioned the dyeing workshop so far. Great. Well, thank you again. And then I want to introduce Rose Maney, who is our other scholarship winner. Every year we've only had one winner, but this year we had a tie and we did a revote and then we had a tie. So we decided that because the previous year the NAMA was canceled, that we would sort of catch up and have two people go because we didn't get to send anyone the year before.
I want to say that it means a lot that I was able to do this. Without the scholarship, it wouldn't have been possible for me at all. And I do have some experience with mushrooms. I did the Cornell Small Farms. Yeah, so the Foray was absolutely amazing. It was like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I never would have been able to go without the scholarship, so it means a lot. I went with my mom. She like came with because she was a ski instructor in Granby, the same place they have the Foray, like before she had me, so like 25 or 26 years ago. And she was like amazed at all the changes to the area and like how some things are, still kind of the same because she was a ski instructor there. So it was like memory lane with her. So yeah, it was my first time in Colorado. It was my first time at any kind of conference that was anything like this at all. The first Foray I went on was technically the day before NAMA. It was the Foray to Winter Park, and all the photos in here are photos I've taken myself. So we had to take a gondola up a very, very, very big hill to get up to the top. And the Foray was scheduled to last several hours. It did not last several hours because there was a really scary thunder and lightning storm and everyone had to go down early. And we all had to take buses because the gondolas would have been a lightning hazard. But you can see in that photo, we're gaming, who takes what path and where to go. So because it got cut short early, we didn't necessarily bring back very much, but this is the biggest haul anybody had, and necessity being the mother of invention, he carried it in his huge umbrella. And you can see the really big ones there, I think are boletes, which it was a theme the entire weekend. They had like an unprecedented, crazy good mushroom season because I think they just had like crazy amounts of rainfall and then periods of nothing and crazy amounts of rainfall. They said it had been the best it was in at least 20 years. So there were really huge boletes, which we'll see in a little bit if you want to go to the next one. So the next day I did the Genko Lake hike and Foray, which was fun, but honestly kind of grueling. It was several miles at like, I think 10,000 feet elevation, which I really wasn't used to. And you can see me standing in front of what is only a small part of the lake. It is honestly extremely huge. That doesn't do it justice. And I almost got left, I didn't get left behind by the bus, but I came kind of close. It was such a long route. If you want to go to the next one. Yeah, so it was beautiful. A lot of the mushrooms were like just massive because the weather had been so nice and everything was really green. And if you want to skip to the next one. Yeah, so there you can see there were a lot of boletes, and in that picture you can see like I think one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. It's on that woman's lap. It's huge. If you go to the next slide, we'll get a bigger close-up of it. Yeah, it was enormous. I think a lot of the time when you're hunting mushrooms in like Wisconsin and Minnesota, like you have to like really look carefully and kind of keep an eye out. And in Colorado, I know they said it was unprecedented, but like you couldn't walk without tripping over a mushroom. They were huge and they were everywhere. And it made the sample room, like with all the mushroom IDs, so much more impressive just because of that. All right, next slide. My favorite mushroom I found the whole time was probably like the golden coral mushroom or the Romaria, I think Largenti. I found so many of them. They're this gorgeous, vibrant yellow color. It doesn't show through in the photo at all. Yeah, all right, next slide. Yeah, there were wild strawberries too. And that's a shot of probably like this really beautiful marshland, probably my favorite spot in Colorado that I've seen. All right, next slide. My favorite presentation was on burn morels and using GIS to find the place, to basically find burn morel spots. So there's someone named Trent Blizzard. He runs a company called The Modern Forager, and he was living, I think in Colorado, but he recently moved to Cable, Wisconsin. So he's fairly close by us. And he did a presentation on using GIS maps to locate potential burn morel spots. And if you want more information, you can go to his website. He also has a book with a lot of different maps already cross-referenced and pulled up. I don't think he has any for Minnesota. If you go to the next slide, I bootlegged a couple of his slides to show you. So there's 6 different morel species that tend to pop up. I didn't even know this was a thing, but after you've had like a forest burn come through and kind of like decimate an area, you will have morels popping up. It's a really great environment for them to grow, and they're everywhere. Like there are thousands of them, but you have to find them first. So serious morel hunters will use online burn maps. Like there are a couple listed on the side there, and you'll look for what type of trees morels tend to grow near, how recent the burns were, certain points of elevation. He went into it. He's a real expert. And you basically use GIS maps to kind of layer them on top of each other and figure out where the common spots are amidst all of those factors. And those common spots are going to be where you find burn morels. All right, next slide. Yeah, so we have the burn checklist there. You want heavy tree structure, tree species, aspect, steepness, whether it's accessible by car or if you have to go on foot. You have to find national forest. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And then the one thing that kind of put me off it a little bit was because you have the fires and because you have some deforestation from that and everything's been shook up, there are flash floods, there's wind, really giant holes that have been hidden. And I guess you have to be careful because trees will just randomly fall. So it's probably the most hazardous type of mushroom hunting I've encountered. Next slide. And when I was there, I met a lot of volunteers who were really making everything work. They spent their whole day, basically the whole 2.5 days of the conference in the mushroom ID room. And a lot of them tended to be younger. I'd say probably most of them were under 30. So I just wanted to introduce you to some of them. I talked to someone named Lux, who's African-American, and she talked to me a lot about the need for diversity and how a lot of mushroom hunting spaces tend to be like, pretty white, and she wants to see more diversity there. I talked to Clarissa Aran, who is applying for grants to start an educational after-school program for kids to learn about mushrooms. I talked to Alex Smith, who's working on his master's degree in Colorado, and he is doing genetic sequencing for mushrooms. He talked to me about it for a really, really long time, and he's incredibly knowledgeable. I talked to Devin Lindsay. She's a local carpenter who runs a spot called Treeline Studios, and she's been mushroom hunting with her parents since she was a kid. And also Kyle Schutz, who's a PhD candidate in medical mycology. And he's not actually studying mushrooms, he's studying yeast. But it was really exciting to meet so many cool people who were dedicating their time just completely free to get better at IDing mushrooms and to help with donations. All right, next slide. There's the I Heart Corn Smut shirt, which was done by a Wisconsin artist. The merch tables were pretty fantastic. So some of the talking points during the conference were, as I've said before, like Colorado specific, like droughts, lake levels have gone down almost permanently, and mushroom species are changing their location based off of the climate. There's been research on heavy metals and how Swillus bovinus absorbs those and how they impact the local environment and how that can be used. And one thing I found really interesting was a presenter from Chicago. Oh, if you could go forward one. Oh, back one. Oops. It's okay. He was talking about how in Chicago, they're not allowed to bring back any of the mushrooms they forage. There's one person from their entire group is allowed, and that's because that person's a professor. So he talked about like kind of foraging rights versus the tragedy of the commons. We're in a big city like Chicago without much forest around it. You have a lot of people hunting for mushrooms, and you want to make sure that there are enough for everyone, especially just to go out and ID. But at the same time, it's kind of a drawback to not be able to bring any of them back with you unless you're a professor. And he also made a statement to NAMA encouraging the organization to take a stance on psychedelic mushroom research, because apparently NAMA has not made any type of official stance the entire time the organization has existed. And he said, these conversations are happening without us. They're going to happen anyways. And I think that we should come forward as supporting psychedelic mushroom research rather than villainizing it. So that's his stance. I thought that was really interesting conversation, and I'd love to hear other people weigh in later. And he also gave a shout out to the Minnesota Mycological Society for offering the scholarship. And he was advocating for greater accessibility for like young people and low-income people and students. And like I said, I wouldn't have been able to go to the conference without this scholarship. So I agree with him on that. All right, next slide. There was a really cool silent auction, and I won't go too much into it, but I did want to highlight this quilt. It was made by someone named Anne Floyd. Never met her, but apparently she was a really big mushroom collector, and she supported this society for decades. And though she did pass away, her quilt made it to NAMA to be auctioned off to raise money, which I thought was really lovely. All right, next slide. There is basically all the mushrooms people find get donated during the process, and it gets donated to the Fungal Diversity Survey. That's where all of all the samples inevitably go. So here's an infographic about different ways to take pictures of mushrooms and stuff if you're going to send them in. All right, next slide. But basically they get ID'd by volunteer, double checked by an expert, they get photographed, and that's the photography table right there. They're displayed throughout the whole weekend, and then the ones that are the best quality samples get sent to the Denver Botanical Gardens, which was the closest partner for the fungal diversity survey, which is where these will inevitably end up. And at the very end of NAMA, we have an expert. Now you can go to the next one. Yeah, we have an expert giving a talk about kind of the evolution of fungi over time. And you can skip to the next one. Yeah, and then we've got the mushroom life cycle puzzles, which are going to be on mycoguide.com. And if you want to go to the next one. Yeah, the sheer volume of mushrooms, I've never seen so many mushrooms in a room. It was amazing. Next slide. I think we might have another example of that. Yeah, like it was essentially just 2 rooms of tables and tables on mushrooms. All right, next slide. Here's some cool samples I really liked. The photos are really not doing it justice. They were super vibrant. All right, and then someone brought the lobster mushroom from the Oregon coast. This is me holding a Boletus rubriceps, like literally twice as big as my head. It's crazy how big they got, and that was because they were having a monsoon season with so much rain coming in and periods of growth in between. Right, next slide. Okay, so you can see that one is, it's like the biggest amanita in the world. I cannot believe how gorgeous they are in person. If you ever get the chance to go out, I highly recommend it. All right, next slide. And then there were some kind of favorite finds that were really quirky. I think that people went crazy being stuck in a room IDing things all day. So we have the Calvadia diplodotus, or the Coway golf ball that got brought back. A rubber duckius habericeus. Next slide. And then my favorite find is we have 2 actual mushrooms and the last straw. And then next slide. Here's another example of exactly how big things get. I think that's a large polypore fomitopsis. Yeah. And every single one of those mushrooms, they had to like weigh them, check different physical characteristics, where they were found, all this other information, and put your name on it in case they need to contact you. It was super, super well organized, and the volunteers did an amazing job. All right, next one. More tables. Next one. And then I didn't know this was happening locally, but there was the Telluride Festival, which I'm really sad that I missed. It's, I think, like an hour or 2 away from Granby, but I really want to go back someday. It's been around since the 1970s, since they had a medical conference there. The 2021 guest was Paul Stamets, which would have been really cool to see in person, although I did manage to pick up a mushroom growing book from him at the auction that was autographed. The Telluride Festival was actually profiled by Vogue in 2019. I read that article, and it is a really good read. There are forays, speakers, puppets, a parade, camping, costumes. It seems extremely cool. All right, and the last one, there was kind of a silver lining, or I should say a rainbow. That is the view from the back of my hotel room. And there was like a gorgeous double rainbow on my last day there. And my roommate snapped that picture of me. I was taking a shower, and she's like, "You got to come out and see this." So I ran out my towel and we took pictures. It was an absolutely once in a lifetime opportunity, and I'm extremely grateful to have had it and to have been blessed with this scholarship. So thank you. And that's my last slide. And if anybody has any questions about the experience or anything like that, I am absolutely happy to answer them.
Are you in biology area that works with fungi?
No, I was previously a forestry major. I am a master naturalist as well. So my background, I have a background in educating children. I'm now going back to school for something different. But even though I'm doing that, I'm still like, you know, doing master naturalist and doing volunteer work. And I did the Cornell Small Farms class, and I'm trying to like continue working in education in like in a non-professional way, I suppose.
I would just ask because to let everyone know that so many of the volunteers were students that work with their professor to come there. The professor doesn't necessarily have to accompany them at all, but they put their names forward and their way is paid. So just wanted to inform people about that.
Oh yeah, everyone I spoke to who volunteered had an amazing experience. And there was like such a cool, like crazy energy and camaraderie in the sample room. It's really great to go.
Howard, were you gonna, maybe your question was similar?
I had the same question. I just was curious about what your background was that got you this scholarship, and but you kind of answered it.
Yeah, well, I started mushroom hunting when I was in Wisconsin a couple of years ago, and then I just moved here during COVID. So it's been cool to become a part of this organization because it's been very difficult to meet people during COVID. Yeah, so I did become a Minnesota Master Naturalist a couple months ago, and I do have a background in education, especially with young people. So what I want to do is take my experience with like doing Cornell Small Farms mushroom program and the experience of doing the Foray and use that as a master naturalist to better educate young people about like mushroom ID and kind of make it like a fun hands-on thing to do.
Right.
Awesome.
That's going to be one of the pushes at NAMA in the coming year or 2 or 3 is educating youth, actually starting pre-K going forward, and can put you in touch with our new first vice president is taking that charge on to lead it. And should also mention, you had talked about meeting Trent Blizzard, or maybe it was Kathy.
Yeah, it was Trent.
And he's NAMA's new president starting in 2022 for the next 3 years. So just elected last month.
Oh, great. That's awesome. I somehow missed that. That's so cool.
So glad that you could attend, Rose. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing.
I was just going to mention a couple things. First off, because I know we had a Burn Morel lecture years and years ago by Todd Osmondson, who's down in La Crosse, and he was talking about how there really aren't true Burn Morels here up in Minnesota. They're more of a West Coast thing. But I was kind of chatting with Trent and talking about like, gosh, do you think any of the fires up in the boundary waters would produce Burn Morels? And he was totally open to mapping them and, you know, taking a shot at looking. It's definitely something I think for us to, knowing that we've had huge fires up in the boundary waters. Gosh, I would just love to see if, like, are there Burn Morels that have been dormant for years and years and years and years, and they actually do exist here? So there's that. What else was I going to mention? Oh, I was also going to mention how thrilling it was that the Colorado NAMA Foray was one of the youngest I've seen in years and years. I remember when I went to the Lafayette Foray, everyone said, "Oh, you're so young," being, you know, what, in my early 40s or something. Everyone thought I was the young person at the Foray. So I found it thrilling that there was such a young crowd and such an interest in mushrooms. I also thought that the energy there was electric, and it was exciting. And then lastly, because you just joined the club and maybe weren't at the Wisconsin Foray, I'm also a quilter, and I found that quilt so touching. The seed money to start this scholarship program was from a quilt raffle that we made in honor of Marek to start this program. So it's kind of full circle that you, a recipient, was, you know, noticed the quilt and how much sort of heart was in that for someone to make it and then pass it on and to have it be something that earns money for the club. So I find that just as touching. So yeah, thank you for taking that picture and showing it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really, really glad that kind of came full circle. It's really fortunate.
And I'm going to kind of add a sort of anticlimax to the whole thing, is that I'm going to just make some comments about it, because I've been to 4 NAMAs now. And, you know, yeah, I was in a picture, and, you know, I raised my hand once, primarily I was at this last NAMA because I won an award, and I was blessed by our local club. And out of that whole thing, then it was like, well, you won the award once, you need to be the chairperson of the award committee. So you have to be a little bit careful when you raise your hand. So I'm going to put that out there for Rose. Now you've won, a scholarship thing, and the same thing to Viktor. But throw down the gauntlet and, get involved in a higher degree. I mean, one of the things that I enjoy about NAMA, and again, like Howard's experience, I share it with my wife, Claudette, who's the only reason why I even thought about looking for a mushroom, because her family started her off when she was 3. So I just kind of hang along. And the next thing you know, I'm teaching certification classes and a bunch of other things. Well, the best thing about NAMA is you get to share experiences with other individuals and share stories, and you find out how other clubs are dealing with some of the challenges and some of the headaches that actually can go with operating a large club. And we've become a very large club. And I learned that many of the other organizations, regardless of their size, are dealing with many of the same things that we deal with. How to deal with forays, how to get signups, how to deal with the regulations. It was mentioned. You mentioned the regulations in Chicago. We're dealing with making sure that we work with our DNR closely to try to keep on the right side of that whole issue, so that we can forage and we can continue to learn and educate the general population a little bit more about this fungal kingdom, that there is so much information and so much knowledge that we just do not know. One of the things that struck me too is the numbers that Howard talked about. It's 168 or so, 170. That's such a tiny number of individual species. As I've mentioned, I've been to 4 different forays, and with the exception of the one in North Carolina, because they had absolutely no rain, they really didn't have a lot of species that were found there. But our cable one that we did back in 2017, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like 560, I think was the number of species. Now, then again, as you saw, Rose, as you walk around the woods in Colorado, there was mushrooms everywhere, but they were the same mushrooms. The diversity is not the same. And that's one of the things that strikes me about going to these national forays or even regional forays that we have. You find the diversity that, you have different trees, you have different climate. There's so many different reasons why things are different, but then you learn to appreciate what you have in our particular area. We have a very, very diverse fungal community that we tap into in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, even in the metro area. Our lichen diversity is incredible on the North Shore. There's so many things that you learn about your local area by learning more about the other areas that you go to search. The one coming up now in Missouri, that will be in the end of September. You think, well, that's just going to be another Midwest foray. So what are we going to find that's going to be different? There's a lot of differences, and it's worth going down there. For one thing, they have the smooth chanterelle. We don't have smooth chanterelles here. We always thought we did, but then we learned that we don't, and they have them. And what's the difference between them? It's a little teeny thing, but there's other different diverse things, and you're able to actually put faces with the names of some of the individuals that have written books you have and read and you use and you research. And it's not like just the Teresa Maroney and the Kathy Yerich that you reading their book, but all the other individuals that you see, and you get to, you actually, if you go on websites and all of a sudden these individuals' names and you put faces with them and you find out that these are real people and they're fun to talk to, they're fun to be around, and you share the same insanity that they do, that you're insane about this fungal community, this thing that, most people look at you and think that you dance naked around the campfire or something, but sorry. I just got hit by my wife, but at any rate, that's more a Telluride thing. So, but the keynote speakers, are always varied and very enlightening over, no matter what the speech is, no matter what it is. But when you're sitting on the bus going to a Foray site and suddenly you're talking with a lady about the upcoming Missouri mushroom, the Nama that's going to be there, and you're sitting next to the lady that wrote this book. And she was right on the bus with us. There's Missouri's Wild Mushrooms by Maxine Stone, and it's got recipes and all kinds of stuff, and just learning. Just it's incredible. It just broadens your horizons. And as Howard did, we made a whole trip of it. I had never been to Mount Rushmore, so we did that on the way back. So we saw Crazy Horse, Mount Rushmore. And one of the other things that really struck me about Colorado, and I, and then I'll sign off from it, is the respect that they gave to the Native American community, to the indigenous people that hunted those hills, that lived in those hills, that had to thrive and survive in the conditions in those mountains. And we were just on the west, just on the other side, the west side of the Continental Divide, and how they had to deal with all of the unique aspects of that, and how much that ecology is changing, and all the water issues that are being pumped into Arizona and then Southern California, and it's so incredible. The things that you learn and the things that you take for granted, it opens your eyes, and that's what I really enjoy about it so very, very much. So anyhow, it's not a lot of money to join NAMA. You already get a discount because you're, part of this insane group. So it's not a lot of money. Go on their NAMICO website and check it out. It's easy to join, and consider coming. We've got over 1,000 members, and if we all go to Missouri, we're not all going to get in. But we routinely, as was said, are about 10% of most NAMAs, and that was true when we went to the Pacific Northwest. Paul Smith's out in New York probably was very similar in a lot of different places. So
they always comment on what a contingent Minnesota brings.
Yeah.
We travel well.
Adele, you're a great example too, that you and Peggy and folks sometimes ride together or take the train. I think it's, if you're open to just chatting to people about it. I know some people have done carpools or decided, hey, let's make sure that we're roommates and we'll do, a shared dorm space. I've gone to NAMA where I signed up late and they only had space left in kind of like a shared female dorm with like 10 other people. And I had the most lovely time. It was just awesome. Maggie and I rode down in my tiny car and ate Chinese food out of to-go containers that she brought from the restaurant. I was like, she's the best person to travel with ever. So yeah, I've had some of my most fun.
Well, you talked too about making friends across the U.S. and one of our roommates is a friend from Louisville whom we met many years ago at a NAMA Foray. So she joins us. Peggy and another Minnesota member, Judy Kenny, and I rode together, and we'll be probably doing the same thing to Missouri because we always check out the train routes and there isn't a very convenient one. So usually we do train and then rent a car for the rest of the way and during the foray. So it's really fun to try some different means of transportation too.
Perfect. I think Jane was going to share some photos from her NAMA trip as well.
I didn't take a lot of pictures there, and I have pictures of some other mushrooms, but I'll just mainly show you the edibles. And that's of course our favorite Amanita. There's some boletes that I was slicing up, getting ready for the dehydrator in the hotel room at Snow Mountain Ranch. They're really beautiful.
We had 8 dehydrators going and blew out the breaker in our room.
Yeah, I did find some chanterelles, but not a lot. They were kind of hard to find too, because they were like, hidden by the grass. So that's just a kind of a fairy ring of Amanita muscaria. And I thought this was like the most incredible thing that I had ever seen. Big platters of them, like, 6 inches or 8 inches wide. And that's a nice bolete. This is Lactarius deliciosus. I was really fascinated by them because they're orange and green. And I also went to the Telluride Mushroom Festival, and this is one of the best pictures of the mountains there that I took. And here's a nice basket full of edibles. We got boletes, we got the hawkswings, we got the Lactarius deliciosus. We got a few little chanterelles, and I think that's about it. And there's a picture of some of those Lactarius after I cut them up. They smelled kind of fruity, kind of like Fruit Loops. They were I was just fascinated by them. I wished that I did cook up just a little to taste, but I dehydrated the rest, and I'm not sure how that'll work out, but so, and you were talking about dehydrators. I thought that was kind of like one of the funniest things about the forays to me, was that the thing going on with the dehydrators. I knew that people were at NAMA were like saying, "Oh, do you have a spare dehydrator? Because I got a lot." And so people would lend out their dehydrators, and I'm just kind of trying to picture this. I would imagine that if the hotel had the lodge had known that we were all powering all these dehydrators, they probably wouldn't have been very happy about it. But everybody was doing that. In fact, a lot of them too also, like we had, I think most of the rooms had either a patio outside or had a, maybe it might have had a balcony. I'm not sure what the upstairs was like. I was downstairs, but so that I didn't have to endure a dehydrator in the room while I'm trying to sleep. I put mine outside and on the patio overnight and plugged it in an outside outlet that I found on the back of the building. So
many of you who are new to foraging, until you have endured the joy of the smell of dehydrating mushrooms. Maybe can't really understand that, but boy, that smell was permeating every nook and cranny of that large lodge that we were at. And I'm just wondering if they did something to actually try to mitigate some of that. Because I mean, it's not bad. It's just different.
The purification system must have been working overtime. This foray, in my opinion, of all the ones I've attended, had the most largest number of dehydrators and discussion about dehydrators. And that's because word got out before the foray began about the big bolete crop. And so people, I think this year made a special effort if they were able to bring a dehydrator. So that is something that isn't quite as prominent in a lot of places we go to.
Yeah, from what I heard, this was an unusual year and very specific to the area we were in Colorado. I don't know, it was like a 20, 50 mile radius or something. It was that spot got the rain just at the right time. And for decades, for 50 years, it happened when we were there. So it was very lucky.
So NAMA always tends to try to time and schedule it in an area where it's anticipated that's like prime mushrooming season. So Kathy mentioned one of the ones that she went to was in January. That was on the West Coast. So that's why the end of September is the Missouri one coming up. End of September, early October. So that should be prime time for them. So consider it. Think about it. And anytime you hear us talking about NAMA or NAMA, tomato, you know, but it's the North American Mycological Association. So it's not the parent organization of all of us. However, we're all affiliated clubs. So